Okay, hi guys. I'm Max. This is Philip. Smoking, cool. We're gonna talk about Signal and WhatsApp today. So first, I want to start with a question: Who in this room is using Signal? Okay, it's a decent amount of hands. Good. Who in this room is using WhatsApp? Or no? Yeah. Okay. Okay, almost everyone. So this kind of proves the point that WhatsApp is the world's largest messenger service. It's used for private and professional communication. There's a lot of stuff going on over WhatsApp. There's a lot of appointments, orders, crime, everything happens on WhatsApp. And it accounts to over 3 billion users that use it daily. And it's a default communication platform for Latin America as well. We've seen a lot of posters where WhatsApp was basically the main communication platform. And Signal is also a massive platform, but more for the privacy-focused users. So this only accounts for 70 million users in general, but it's also used by government officials and important government agencies. For this talk, what we're going to show, remember that everyone using these apps is affected by our findings. And the only thing we need for this to work is only your phone number. So we don't need any form of interaction, any acceptance from you. We just need your phone number. And again, why is this relative for you guys especially? We can see here a map which shows like the distribution of different messengers. And we can see that WhatsApp is heavily used in Latin America, but also in Europe. That's why we looked at it, for example. But especially again here in Latin America and Argentina, we have a really big amount of users. Now to us, we're gonna have Philip speaking a little bit later. He's a master's student at the TU Wien. He's also a security researcher at SBA Research. He's researching into cellular networks and mobile security, and it's his first time speaking as well, so this is quite exciting. I'm also a master's student, but at the University of Vienna. I'm a distributed systems infrastructure security engineer in my free time. I also do bug bounty, and I'm also an independent researcher. And it's my first Ekoparty, so this is quite cool as well. I really, really like it already. So how did you get here? Everything basically started as my bachelor thesis, so I needed a decent topic which interested me. And Gabriel, the guy that you see here on the left, he gave me a nice topic and gave me the idea of looking into WhatsApp. And in general, I just wanted a positive grade in order to pass, in order to get my degree. But we ended up discovering vulnerabilities which affected billions of users. So this is quite nice. This was quite cool. So for this, we also needed a small team of independent researchers, which helps us to refine the findings that we had and put everything into research papers so we can give back to the research community. This is like the beautiful people that you see down here. They all helped in order to verify the findings, improve the findings, and make actually valid research out of it. And what it also shows is that we're a really small team as well. In the beginning, it was just Gabriel and me. So this shows that everyone can find vulnerabilities in such massive, refined systems. And yeah, this is when I'm going to give it now to Philip, who is going to give you a background on modern instant messenger services.
Thank you. So before we go into some of our findings, we'll go over some quick background information that's necessary for later. Starting at the basics with end-to-end encryption. Now, in the context of messaging services, end-to-end encryption simply means that messages are encrypted at the sender and then only decrypted once they reach the recipient. Crucially, that also means that the messaging service itself is unable to access the messages, which also has the neat side effect of breaking lawful interception, and which is also why end-to-end encryption often comes under attack from the intelligence community. Some examples for end-to-end encrypted messengers, or the biggest examples, are Signal, Facebook Messenger, and WhatsApp. And in our talk, we'll focus mainly on WhatsApp, but also we'll talk a bit about Signal. Now, most of these messaging services also allow multi-device setups. In a multi-device setup, one account can be used across multiple devices. And in order for these multi-device setups to work, there's two basic approaches. So in order for them to work with end-to-end encryption. One is a leader-based approach, where one main device is responsible for handling all the end-to-end encryption. And then that primary device synchronizes with the companion devices so that the companion devices can also send and receive messages. Clearly, that means that the primary device becomes a single point of failure. So if that primary device is offline, then all the other companion devices are also not able to send or receive any messages. This is also the approach that was used until 2021 by WhatsApp Web, before they switched to the other approach, which is called client fanout. Now, in the client fanout approach, every device has its own cryptographic identity and key. And now to send messages, it's necessary to not only send one encrypted message, but to send an encrypted message to each recipient device. So if we look at the example at the bottom right, we have Alice and Bob. Bob has 3 companion devices, and Alice has 2 devices. Now, if Alice wants to send a message to Bob, she has to encrypt the message 4 times. 3 times for each device, for each individual device of Bob, and then also a 4th time for her own companion device. This is also what's now used by, as I hinted at earlier, WhatsApp Web, but also by Signal. Now, one side effect of this client fanout approach is that it inherently has some privacy leaks. Now, initially, those are mostly minor, but it means that we can track for every user how many active devices that user has, since the list of devices has to be public so that senders know which devices to address with their encrypted messages. And it also has the side effect that we know which device is the originator of an encrypted message. And that together with some additional information, so if we know that a specific device of one user is a device that he always uses at home, then we can already implement a very simple kind of location tracking where we know, okay, if the user is using device A, then he's likely at home. And as a side note, the way different devices in WhatsApp and also Signal are identified is simply through an index. So the main device has index 0, and then each additional companion device just gets the next index. So the final thing that we'll need, and this is going to be important in a bit, are the different delivery states of messages in WhatsApp. So initially, if you send a message on WhatsApp, you get this little clock symbol displayed in the UI, which simply means that the message has been sent, but no delivery receipt has been received yet. The next state is a single check mark, which means that the message has arrived at the messenger server, and the server has told the sender that the message has arrived. And then the important thing is this third state with 2 check marks, which happens when the receiver has received the message and also was able to successfully decrypt the message. It then sends a so-called delivery receipt back to the sender. And then finally, there's also read receipts, which are sent when the user actually reads the message. Now, read receipts can be disabled in the privacy settings, but the delivery receipts actually can't be disabled. So now let's get to the fun part and discuss some of our vulnerabilities that we found. So in this first part, I'm going to mainly talk about findings of a paper called Careless Whisper, where we focused mainly on privacy leaks that are a result of those delivery receipts. So initially, we just played around with the official clients, but then very quickly we realized that we needed some more flexibility, and so we switched to third-party implementations. So for WhatsApp, we used a project called WhatsMeow, and for Signal, we used a project called Signal CLI. One of our first ideas was that we wanted to try and find a way to send messages that trigger delivery receipts, but that don't really show up in the UI. So we did some testing to figure out what actually causes delivery receipts to be sent, and we found that, at least for Signal and WhatsApp, it's not only messages that trigger delivery receipts, but it's also reactions, edits, and deletes. But crucially, only messages cause push notifications consistently, and then sometimes reactions depending on whether you on what message you react to. So that was the beginning, but we then quite quickly actually discovered an even better approach, which was to send reactions to messages that did not exist. So what happened in that case is that the recipient receives a reaction, is able to decrypt that message, sends a delivery receipt, but then can't actually display the reaction in the UI since the message that the reaction is supposed to react to doesn't exist. So now we had a way to completely silently ping any target device without any message showing up in the UI. So immediately, that gives us a very rudimentary way of tracking, simply by consistently pinging devices and checking whether they answer with delivery receipts. So here we have a very simple example of some target user with 3 different devices. And especially if we have some additional information, like in this case, where we know that the second device is a computer that this person uses at work, and the third device is a home workstation. So we see that the main device, the smartphone, during the whole time frame responds with delivery receipts and is online. The work computer is initially online and responding with delivery receipts, but then goes offline at some point, and the other way around for the home workstation. So looking at this, we could already kind of do some tracking and say, okay, well, maybe that person was at work and then went home at some point. But so far, we've only looked at whether we do get an answer or not. So then the next question we had was, okay, what about the round-trip time? So the time between sending one of those ping messages to receiving a delivery receipt. Our theory was that maybe we could use that pinging to determine different client states. And so we looked at different smartphones and tried to differentiate between 3 different states. One where the phone was in an inactive state, one where the phone was in an active state, but the messaging app wasn't running in the foreground, and then finally a state where the phone is active and also the messaging app is open. And looking at some data, we very quickly, after some testing, realized that we could at least tell the difference between the phone being in an inactive state versus being in an active state. So on iOS, for example, on the left side, we saw that when the device was inactive, delivery receipts took around 2,000 milliseconds of round-trip time. And then once the phone was turned on, those round-trip times dropped to around 1,000 milliseconds. We will now mainly focus on the smartphone main devices, but it also works for companion devices. So on the right side, you can see a pretty drastic example with WhatsApp Web running on Firefox, where if the tab is active, the round-trip times are significantly lower than if they are than if the tab is inactive. So now let's go for a demo, not so live demo. Oh. So here we have our office mascot sitting with a phone that is initially inactive, and we see that the round-trip times are, let's call it, around 1,500 milliseconds. And then in a few seconds, the phone will turn on, and the round-trip times should drop. And as we can see, now the round-trip times drop to around, let's call it 1,000 milliseconds. And then if the phone is inactive again in a few seconds, the round-trip times jump up again, and interestingly, initially, the round-trip time jumps up even higher than the 1,500 milliseconds, but then it will slowly go down to the 1,500 milliseconds again. And then for the last state, we open WhatsApp, and we can see that the round-trip times drop even further than the 1,000 milliseconds that we had when the phone was simply active, but WhatsApp wasn't open. But now let's talk about some of the limitations of this. So for Signal, we very quickly ran into the problem that we couldn't actually ping with a very high frequency because we would run into rate limits and we could only really get away with one ping every 2 seconds. But for WhatsApp, for some reason, we actually never really observed any rate limiting, which made that sort of tracking really convenient. Another drawback of our approach is that different client implementations on different devices all behave rather differently. So it can be difficult if you don't know the target device type to actually do this kind of differentiation. So on this next slide, we see an example of that. So on the left, we have a Xiaomi device where the difference between the phone being inactive versus it being active in the round-trip times isn't that pronounced. You can still kind of see a difference. But for the Samsung device, it's much larger, that difference. Another thing we can see here is that for the Samsung device, we actually had to decrease our probing frequency, because if we probed too quickly, we would actually prevent the device from going into a standby. And then on this slide, we see that for all the different devices that we tested, at least between the screen on and screen off states, we could always usually see a difference between the distribution of the round-trip times. And then at some point, we asked one of our colleagues whether he'd be okay with being tracked for a couple of hours. And then the result is visible here on the right. So he had 3 different devices, one smartphone that he carried with him, a home workstation, and a work laptop. And in our example, we caught him going from home to work, hence why, like in the earlier example, the home workstation goes offline at some point, and then the work laptop comes online. But more interestingly, for the smartphone, we actually see a difference in the round-trip time behavior between different access technologies. So initially, he was at home, and his phone was connected to Wi-Fi. Then at some point, he left. His phone switched to a cellular connection, and the behavior of the round-trip times slightly changes. And then when he arrives at work, his phone connects to the Wi-Fi again, and the behavior goes more or less back to how it was in the beginning. And then also another interesting bit of information is that in the middle here, he was actually making a phone call, which also affected the round-trip times. So in this case, it mostly just decreased the jitter of the round-trip times. So that means you can't only track the device state, but you could also try and track the access technology that's being used. And so far, I've only talked about the round-trip times. I just want to quickly mention there's some other indicators that you could try and use. We saw that sometimes you didn't just get one delivery receipts, but actually multiple delivery receipts. We didn't actually really look too far into when that happens. We think that it probably happens in situations where there's a rather flaky connection. So maybe you could also try and use that to get a slightly better tracking. Another thing we found, which is something slightly different, is that we could do some OS fingerprinting, which is caused by the different client implementations. So different client implementations behave differently in how they send delivery receipts. Some of them send single delivery receipts, some of them send them as batches, and then there's also some differences in how those batches are ordered. So that could obviously be used just plainly as reconnaissance for some other attack, or it could also be used to inform the tracking that we talked about earlier and could make that tracking more efficient. And then another thing that we found is that because WhatsApp at the time we tested this, I think it has changed now to 30 bytes, right? Allowed you to send reactions that could be up to a kilobyte of, could be up to a kilobyte. We could simply spam reactions that are big, that didn't show up in the UI because we used our trick with the silent pinging. And we managed to drain around 13 gigabytes per hour for our target device. And also managed to drain like roughly 18% of the battery per hour. And again, this was completely invisible to the victim, except obviously for the increased traffic. So as a quick summary, an attacker knows how many devices each user has, or can find out how many devices someone uses. To some degree, what device type those devices are, when the devices are online, and also when they are used, so if the device they're on is currently active or not. And maybe to a degree also the access technology that's being used. And that could obviously be used just for reconnaissance or actual surveillance, or unfortunately probably also for stalking. We reported our findings to WhatsApp in the beginning of September 2024. It was then forwarded roughly at the end of September internally to the relevant engineering team. And then in October 2024, we noticed that there was this new setting in the privacy settings of WhatsApp, which says that it blocks unknown account messages, which is actually a pretty good mitigation to what we've talked about. And we weren't really sure if that was in response to our findings or if that was just something that Meta was working on anyway. But we haven't really heard from them for some time after that. And then finally, in September 2025, we managed to get into contact with Meta. For Signal, unfortunately, we reported it at the same time as to Meta, but we haven't gotten any response. And with this, I'll now hand over to Max again, who is going to talk about our second paper.
Thank you, Philip. Okay, cool. Well, in the first paper that Philip presented, focused on the receipt mechanism of WhatsApp, where we send and we get these check marks. For the second paper, which is called Pre-key Pogo, it's there, we looked at the pre-key mechanism of WhatsApp. So what does this mean? And for this, we're going to give you a small crash course again. So WhatsApp uses pre-keys in order to encrypt messages. This kind of makes sense, guys. But it uses 3 layers of these keys. And there are the identity keys, which are static and generally doing the setup of the device. Then there are the signed pre-keys, which rotate once a month, so the medium term. And there are the one-time pre-keys, which are ephemeral and single use only. And note, for every time I'm going to say, like now in the next couple of minutes, that we drained pre-keys, it's going to be one-time pre-keys only. We're going to focus on these only. These are the important ones now. So all of these keys, we need to ensure that WhatsApp uses perfect forward secrecy and post-compromise security. So even in case some messages are being able to be decrypted, the rest cannot be really decrypted. And yeah, we call these a bundle. So all these 3 keys are combined to a bundle. And they're going to be used as follows. This is going to give some Bob and Alice action. So we see the server, and Bob and Alice upload their keys regularly. So I don't have a threshold based on pre-key amounts. For example, for the one-time pre-keys, if there's a certain threshold that's undermined, Bob sends new pre-keys in. Or after expiration, for example, for the medium-term pre-key after the 30-day window. And in order to communicate, for example, Alice wants to initiate a chat with Bob. Alice requests Bob's pre-keys from the server responds with Bob's pre-keys. Alice then encrypts the message with Bob's pre-keys, adds her pre-key bundle and sends it to Bob, and now the end-to-end encrypted channel is established, and now they can communicate without the server knowing what's going on. And this is where our question came up. So what happens if there are no one-time pre-keys? How does the app behave in this situation? And again, for this, we used WhatsMeow to create a custom client, which repeatedly requests those keys and monitors the keys that are left, basically, on the server, like how many are left, and also detects the moment when these keys are being refilled. So in a funny graphic, this looks like this, where we again have Bob and Alice. Bob uploads his pre-keys, and our attacker drains Bob's pre-keys continuously. So in this case, we again exploit the lack of rate limiting that Philip already talked about. and we consume all the available key bundles, and we monitor for new key bundles from the attacker's perspective. And Bob nicely pushes new pre-keys. And this is now where we come to the vulnerabilities that we found with this. And again, we have another way of determining if a device is online or offline. Since all these bundles exist for each single device, since each device is a client in this case, we can now track which device is online or offline. We can see this perfectly in this graphic down here, where we have a smartphone, which is continuously online in either like LTE or Wi-Fi, and we just drain the pre-keys and we check if there are pre-keys left for this device. And if there are pre-keys refilled, we mark this with blue. If there are none, if they are actually empty, we mark them with red. And if we, for example, on the work computer drain the pre-keys and the device turns offline, there is no way of the device being able to push new pre-keys to the server, which means we can assume the device is offline or not connected to the internet anymore, at least. Same for the home workstation, other way around. So we drain pre-keys, we cannot get any, it's marked red, and then as soon as we notice the device turns online, we get new pre-keys, and we can basically see, okay, now the device turned online, which is quite nice. Since this is a little bit of an improvement compared to Philip's version, since Philip had to interact with the end device, we just interact with the server and ask if the device is able to give us new keys, and basically out of this we can see that the device is online or not. And even funnier is it if we do this for multiple devices on different states. So again, same with Philip's approach, where we analyzed multiple devices' behaviors. We did this here as well. And we can see, for example, already in the slide that iPhones and Android devices behave differently in this case, also between the different Wi-Fi and 4G states. But visually, this makes even more sense. So yeah, here we can see that the iPhone, for example, is really slow when it comes to pushing new pre-keys, either because of energy-saving reasons, or we don't know, for example. We don't know what it's causing, but we can see that there's a clear difference between the iPhone and the Android, and by analyzing the refill behavior, we can easily determine if the end device is an iOS device or an Android device. It's going to be a little bit more clear when you see, for example, the Samsung device, which is pushing keys regularly. So it's really, really fast. When the keys are empty, it's pushing them up, and this in every single state. So we see standby Wi-Fi, standby 4G, screen on and screen off for Wi-Fi and 4G. And for example, on the Xiaomi Poco devices, we see that there's a difference between the states as well. So we see that the behavior is also based on the state, for example, on the Xiaomi phones. And this is quite nice in order to enumerate which device or which OS the victim is using on his phone. Another thing we found is a PFS downgrade. So by continuously requesting the one-time pre-keys, when somebody new establishes a chat or conversation with you, for this chat, the conversation will only be secured by the long-term key and by the medium-term key. So we basically stripped a whole layer of keys. This doesn't mean that the messages are now decrypted and we can read them. It's still super secure, like you cannot decrypt them, but it is still something that shouldn't be easily done so easy, like how we did it, basically. And yeah, we call this a PFS downgrade in this case. Yeah, additionally, we found another way of disclosing the OS by looking at the initial key value IDs for the different keys that we're getting from the bundle. So we see marked red that for a signed pre-key, for example, the ID value initially is 0 on Android devices, and it's random on the iPhone. So when we request these, we see a big random number, mostly for the iPhone, and for the Android number, something that has started somewhere around 0. So again, here we have an implementation difference, which enables us to see which device the victim is using again. And we also have this for the desktop clients as well. If you look at the graphic long enough, you'll spot as well differences when it comes to these initial key ID values, but also again for the different keys, so the one-time pre-key and the signed pre-key and the registration key as well. So this is where I'm gonna come to the last vulnerability, which is my most favorite one, to be honest. It's the denial of service. So we go back to the example where we have an attacker and that's draining Bob's pre-keys continuously, and Bob pushes his pre-keys nicely and regularly, but the server now has to synchronize all of these requests. So each request of the attacker has to get its own unique one-time pre-key. And after some time, the server is a little bit overwhelmed and basically starts to send out 503 messages, not only to us, the attacker, but also to Alice, who wants to message Bob and wants to just establish a nice conversation. The issue here now being, if we go back to the initial conversation graphic, Alice needs to get Bob's pre-keys first in order to establish a channel, in order to even encrypt her message to him. So this is not possible, and basically, it breaks the communication. So in the chat, it just shows the clock until indefinite, basically, and it hinders anyone, any third party, from messaging Bob at this point. But for this, we also have a video where Philip is going to help me now queue up the video. Exactly. So yeah, perfect. We see that we have our initiator and our victim. Our victim is the one that we are currently, with our script on the right side, draining the pre-keys from. And we can see that the victim, it's a little bit hard to see probably, but we can see that the initiator is able to message other people, but now we're going to try to message the victim, and we see that the message here with the clock symbol is stuck in the ether, basically. So the message doesn't get received by the victim because there is no way to get pre-keys first. And we can also try to start calls now with the victim, but since calls also need a message to be sent beforehand in order to establish some configuration, this also doesn't work. So same for video calls, same for another call attempt, and this goes on for long now. We can still message other people from the initiator, so the initiator is completely fine, but just the victim cannot be messaged by other third party anymore. And this goes on for longer now. We also try to reopen the app. This doesn't help either, but let me just, where's the mouse? There's the mouse. No. Yeah, we're trying still to message, and at some point we're going to stop our script. So we're gonna stop our clogging soon. So any second now, we should be. Okay. Right now, we stopped our script, and we're still not able to send the message to the victim. Since now they're on the phone, probably on the client side, they're on cooldown right now, and they're just stuck, basically. But as soon as we restart the app now, all the messages are being pushed again, and now the victim receives all these messages. And so we basically have shown now that we were able to basically DOS our victim and make it unavailable for anyone. So that was the demo time. And the impact is quite severe, as everyone can understand, I guess. It hinders anyone from connecting to this user, which is really handy if you want to silence political enemies or like force them to a less secure messenger or to a other messenger, which kind of, I don't know, suits your plan better. It's also really bad for business since, again, all the businesses that are running WhatsApp won't receive any bookings. Everyone that wants to do appointments can't do appointments. Anyone that wants to do crime over it can't do crime anymore. Like it's really bad. It's not good. So for the privacy leaks, on the other hand, we have the same basically as Philip has already shown, that we can track the online device state, we can track the OS, and in this case, a little bit handier since the server does the dirty work for us and we don't really have to interact with the end device that much. This is quite nice. And now to disclosure, we reported these findings to Meta on March 28th. We got really quickly this issue closed on March 30th, which hurt a little bit since it was a duplicate to a previous delivery receipt report, which was at the time a little bit confusing, but this got cleared up, so we understand now why. But we are now, as well, because of these issues, in contact with Meta since September 2025, so this is quite cool. On the other hand, from, not mitigation and key takeaways, I guess. Cool. So basically, how do we fix this mess? And for this, in general, we would advise rate limiting would have probably prevented a lot of these attacks that we have shown. Also, unifying the client behavior would have also made our life harder in order to determine if it's a iOS or Android device, I guess, or also which type of desktop device you're using. For the delivery receipt issue that Philip talked about, it's probably good to randomize the delivery receipt timings. Also, improving client-side message validation is quite important here, since a lot of these issues are coming from the client, since the server cannot really interact or help out a lot. For the pre-key issue that I've showed, where I can strip the layer of pre-keys, it would be nice also to see in the WhatsApp client, for example, that okay, this message has not been encrypted properly, or like this message has been stripped of one layer of prekeys in order to show, okay, there is something going on, there is something weird going on. And yeah, for the key takeaways, combining multi-device setups with end-to-end encryption is a little bit messy. It's always a little bit difficult since each device can leak independently. This is quite of a headache that you want to be aware of. Also, due to end-to-end encryption, there is no way the server can interact or like prohibit certain types of messages. So a lot of impact is on the client to verify these messages. And yeah, hardened messaging protocols like the Signal protocol that WhatsApp and Signal use are quite nice in theory, but as soon as you deploy them in real life and add multiple features to it, they're quite, yeah, they are definitely difficult to deploy in real life since there could be some other issues that come with it. Besides that, I can only say thank you, Ekoparty. If you want to contact us here, we also open for questions. Yes, I think so. If someone has a question, or we're also around the conference probably for the whole week. So if you have a question, just come up to us and talk to us. Here are the papers, and here's our LinkedIn's. And thank you, thank you. Didn't get to sleep too much. Oh, yeah. If someone has a question, again, just take the mic, be brave, and ask us. There, one guy.
Okay.
Brave guy.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your talk. It was
you.
really interesting. I was wondering, maybe, I don't know, maybe I don't understand as deep as you do about end-to-end encrypted messages. Since you were able to drain a layer of keys, is there anything that stopped you from draining like other layers because you can't request the other layers to the server? Is that what I'm understanding right?
The thing is that for the draining of the keys only happens because one-time prekeys have to be individual. So each message has to each request has to get their own one-time prekey, and we cannot really drain the identity key since there's basically permanent. Like the identity key, for example, is permanent until you basically switch the device, or the signed prekey rotates once a month. So like they stay the same basically.
I was also wondering, and this leads to a follow-up question. Since the identity key is generated during setup, and if you know the phone number of the victim, for example, does it get triggered during like whenever you enroll the number in like a new client? Because at some point, like I've seen it, and I think many people here present have seen like a familiar of them like get attacked or like get.
So you're asking if like the identity key is set during the enrollment of the number, or if it's during like doing some other step, for example, like switch a device. We tested both, as far as I know, and we are not quite sure what causes exactly, because there were situations when you enlisted a new device where you took the old identity key. So we found some weird behavior, but also it could be a measurement issue from our side. So good question, good question. You can ask me later. We can talk about it for hours probably.
All right, sure. Thank you for your talk.
Thank you for your question.
¿Alguien más? ¿Alguna pregunta? No.
Cool.
Bueno, muchas gracias Max y Philip. Y ahora sigue la charla de Mario.